One of my favorites that I've heard you tell is when you actually had to introduce yourself to a quarterback in a real game.
Yes, so that's one of my favorite stories. Not a happy ending, of course, but we're playing in Pittsburgh. It's the last game of the season. My left guard was injured, and so Ryan Miller was my left guard, who was the backup. So he doesn't understand we're sliding to the left in the pass protection. So I slide, and I take the widest rusher. The second widest rusher slants to my inside, but my guard's not there because he didn't get the call. And this defensive lineman, I think it was Brett Kiesel, goes and decapitates the poor Thad Lewis in the backfield. And so Thad's laying on the ground, and Ryan's looking at me like, oh crap, did I miss the call? And I'm like, what do you think? Your guy is laying on top of the quarterback who's dead.
Hello again, everybody. Great to see you again. Welcome to Club 46, driven by Bridgestone. I'm Jay Crawford. Thrilled to be joined for this week's installment by Joe Thomas, one of the all-time great Cleveland Browns, one of the all-time great offensive linemen ever to play it. Joe, great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jay. It's really exciting to be on the vaunted Club 46.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I'll tell you, it's going to take a little while because we want to start from the very beginning. We want to go back to the early days, what was a young Joe Thomas like. We also want to hear some of your Brown stories. I'm sure you have many, and we'll get into all of that. And before we start at the beginning, I always like asking guys to explain one of their favorite stories during their time playing for the Cleveland Browns. And I'm sure you got a million of them. But do you have a go-to Cleveland Brown story?
Man, 11 years, 10 of those losing seasons, you become very self-deprecating about your own career. And a lot of the fun stories that I like to tell my buddies usually don't have a happy ending. So I'm trying to think, is there a good one that maybe has a better happy ending for Club 46? A lot of the stories that I love are just sort of the tragic comedy types, especially early on when we had so many different coaches and we were trying so hard to figure it out every 2 years, sometimes 1 year with Rob Chudzinski, and we'd get turnover, but we had a lot of characters in the building, and so a lot of it is personality driven. When you think about all the coaches and the players that I got a chance to play with, and a lot of the funny things that happen on a daily basis when you're kind of struggling through a season.
One of my favorites that I've heard you tell is when you actually had to introduce yourself to a quarterback in a real game.
Yes.
For those that haven't heard that story, it's so funny.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite stories. Not a happy ending, of course, but we're playing in Pittsburgh. It's the last game of the season. I think it's maybe 2012 or something, and we had already gone through 2 or 3 quarterbacks coming up to this last game, and so we signed a couple guys before the game started, and they showed up like Wednesday, Thursday of that week to try to learn the offense. So Thad Lewis was actually the starting quarterback going into the game. Many of you remember Thad Lewis, of course, as the great Browns quarterback for probably 1 or 2 games. But his backup was a guy named Josh Johnson, and he had just been there maybe 2 or 3 days. No practice reps or anything because they were trying to give Thad all the reps they possibly could because he was the starter and he'd only been there a week, maybe 2 weeks. And so we're playing in Pittsburgh. My left guard was injured, and so Ryan Miller was my left guard, who was the backup. And he didn't get the line call. It's fourth quarter. We're driving into the Heinz Field red zone, which is going towards the river if you've been in that stadium. Yeah. And my left guard doesn't get the call, so he doesn't understand we're sliding to the left in the pass protection. So I slide, and I take the widest rusher. The second widest rusher slants to my inside, but my guard's not there because he didn't get the call. And this defensive lineman, I think it was Brett Kiesel, goes and decapitates the poor Thad Lewis in the backfield. And so Thad's laying on the ground, and Ryan's looking at me like, oh crap, did I miss the call? And I'm like, what do you think? Your guy is laying on top of the quarterback who's dead. And so they bring the trainers out, they take Thad off the field, but as you know, even if you're not seriously injured as a player, if the trainers come out, you have to go out for a play. So here comes a quarterback from the sideline to replace Thad, and he's trotting out, and I realize at that point that I don't know what his name is. And so he gets into the huddle, and it's it's third down, and we're right on the edge of field goal range. And actually, we're playing okay in the game, and so things are sort of close. We know that if we can score in this drive, we're within one score because it's a 2-score game right now. And so this is actually kind of an important moment all of a sudden. Like if we convert this third down, we're in field goal range, we can cut it to 1 score and maybe have a chance. Well, he gets into the huddle, and I say, whoa, hang on. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name's Joe Thomas, and I'm your left tackle. And he's like, you can tell he's flustered because he's just trying to remember what the play is. And he's like, okay, yeah, whatever. And he's just trying to focus on the play. Of course, we didn't get the third down conversion.
No.
And he ended up leaving the game. And the next drive, Thad came back in because he was okay, thankfully. But, yeah, that was one of the funny stories that people like to hear from my tragic comedy of a career.
That had to be one of the more surreal moments of your NFL career. But it almost sort of encapsulates your time in Cleveland because that position was such a revolving door for you. Describe the frustration or whatever it was you were feeling about that rotating door at that position.
Yeah, everybody knows quarterback's the most important position on the football field. It's the most valuable position on the team because the success of that position determines the success of everybody else. As a quarterback, you're the one that calls the play in the huddle. You're the one that gets everybody lined up. You're the one that makes sure the offensive line is blocking the right guys, run and pass a lot of times. You're the guy that's IDing the defense. You're changing the play when it needs to, but you're also the leader. And as a leader, you need to be one of the better players on the team, but you need to be the one that's setting the standard in the meetings, on the practice field, outside of the building when you're doing the right things at home. But when you also have that turnover constantly at that position, it's difficult because all of us lemmings on the team that are looking to that leadership position at the quarterback are saying, man, who is the voice? Like you want one voice to be able to talk to the whole team consistently, and not having that consistency is really hard to build a culture. And it's really hard to change a culture, especially when you've had a long string of losing like we did here in Cleveland.
Yeah. Did you ever imagine during your career what it would be like to have the consistency at that position? Throughout your career, New England had one guy.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't take binoculars to see down the road in Indianapolis to start my career. They had Peyton Manning, who'd been there forever. I looked at Green Bay. They had Aaron Rodgers for a long time.
Pittsburgh,
Ben Roethlisberger. Even Joe Flacco was there for a long time.
Yeah.
Andy Dalton. I mean, our division was loaded with good quarterbacks that had been there a long time. And then you mentioned the ultimate example, Tom Brady, right, in New England, who'd been there, 20 years? And same offense, same coaching staff. Yeah. And so they learn the details and the nuance of not only the offense and the defense, but how coaches want them to do things when you have that consistency. Yeah. So there was definitely a lot of jealousy there.
We'll come back to your Browns days, but now I want to go back to the early days of Joe Thomas growing up in Wisconsin. What was it like for you as a young guy?
Yeah. It was great. I mean, I loved all sorts of sports growing up. I didn't watch a ton on TV because I was outside playing them, right? Baseball, basketball, football, a little bit of soccer when I was younger, track and field. I mean, I just wanted to be outside doing any type of sport that I possibly could. And if I wasn't playing a sport, I wanted to be fishing. So for me, everything in my life happened outside.
Yeah. So you weren't really a big sit down and watch the Packers guy. Did you have favorite teams?
I was. I watched the Packers every Sunday with my dad.
Yeah.
Like the routine was after church, you get home, Mom would make chili, and we'd watch the Packers because they were always on at noon.
Sure.
In Central Time. But I listened to the Brewers on the radio, and I listened to the Bucks on the radio. Like at night, I had a little Walkman I would put in my ear when I was supposed to be sleeping, and then I'd always fall asleep with them on. But as far as like watching on TV, a lot of times the only thing we really watched was the Packers, and then outside of that, during the week, I was outside. But I loved doing the sports even more than watching them. I was an active kid. I had a lot of energy, my mom said.
How old were you when you realized I'm different from all the other kids?
Well, I always knew that I was different because I kept hurting my friends when we'd play tackle football. My poor next door neighbor, his name was Nick Hamill, and I think every time we played, his mom had to take him to the hospital when I was done. I broke his collarbone, I broke his fingers, I gave him a concussion.
And how old was that?
We were 7 or 8. you know? And it was always different sports. Like we were playing hockey, I broke his finger. We were playing backyard football, I broke his collarbone. We were playing football. We were doing like the little turkey bowl, and I pushed him into a tree. I mean, come on. I don't know how you get hurt. It was like a 6-foot across willow tree, and he hit his head right on it and had like a lump like that.
So you realized early.
So I realized like I was bigger than people pretty early, and I could keep up with them athletically, but I don't think it really clicked until I was in middle school and I was playing basketball, and one of my teammates' dads had played college football. And he said to me, hey, if you keep growing at this rate, I think you might be good enough to play college football because of how big you are and how well you move. And I was blown away by that. Like it never had crossed my mind that this was maybe something that I could do in college, much less at the NFL level.
Right. Your dad was a good athlete, right?
Yeah, he was a good athlete, but he never went on and played in college. And so there was always encouragement from them. And I knew my dad was a big guy. He was 6'2", 225, and he played cornerback and tight end in high school. So I knew he was a good athlete, but I also was always wondered like, oh, why didn't you play in college? I mean, he went to a smaller school in Wisconsin. He went to Wisconsin-Eau Claire. But I think he was just really driven by the academic side of stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
So did you do all like baseball, basketball, football, hockey? Were you
I
that
was never
guy
a
that would go
hockey
sport
guy.
to sport?
You know, my mom was always like, the hockey gear, it's too expensive, which I totally understand now because my son's just about at that age where they're starting to play hockey in Wisconsin.
Yeah. And you buy it new every year.
Every year. And like the big bags, like $200
Sure.
and everything. And so I totally get it. And they're, you know, it's travel teams. You're going up to Minnesota. You're going up to northern Wisconsin. So it's a big commitment. My mom was more into like the basketball. All right. Here's the ball. There you go, kid.
Yeah.
Football. Oh, we get the rental stuff from the program every year, so you don't have to buy the helmet. You don't have to buy anything but like the mouth guard and the cleats. But yeah, I was in baseball until I was like 12 or 13. Soccer. Started playing football after I quit soccer when I was 12.
So football was not your first love then?
I always loved it, but in my town you couldn't play football till 5th grade, and my mom didn't want me to play until 7th grade. She was like, you know, doesn't want me to get hurt, which is kind of funny because I never got hurt.
You were hurting other kids.
I was the one doing the hurting, so maybe she was feeling bad for my friends.
Do you agree with that? Waiting until later to play football? What's the right age?
Yeah, I think right now, as the studies are coming out, I think it's great to get kids involved with flag football really early, get them involved, but then maybe wait a little bit longer on tackle football. I think when I grew up, 5th grade was when you could start playing tackle, but maybe waiting till 7th grade like I did, or maybe even waiting till high school. I don't think it would hurt kids' development. I think it would recruit more kids to the sport, get them more interested if you had that flag option, especially early on. And it sounds like waiting is better for brain health and things like that. So it's something I'm definitely going to continue to watch and see where that research and where those studies keep coming in. And certainly when my son gets to be that age, that'll be kind of the conversation we have. But I'm definitely a big believer in all the benefits that football and tackle football brings specifically.
You had mentioned a couple of years ago that you were starting to experience some short-term memory loss. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible for anyone to know in the moment why.
Yeah.
But have you developed any other hypothesis? Do you think it's football related? And will that weigh into your decision as to whether or not you encourage or discourage your own son from following in your footsteps?
Well, I think the hard thing about short-term memory loss is that there are no double-blind studies on yourself, because that's really the only way you would know what could be causing you to forget your keys or walk into a room and forget why you walked into that room. Could it be just that's your DNA? Like my mom, she's forgetful. She can't remember anybody's names. Like she never played a down of football in her life. That's just, my DNA maybe. Or could it be just I got a lot of stuff going on. I got 4 kids. I got the balance of the Cleveland Browns, the NFL Network, my social life, my family life. Like the family stuff, like there's a lot of things going on that's in your brain constantly that you're thinking about. Could it be the football? Like obviously 11 years in the NFL and 4 years in college, that takes a toll on your body, and those hits on your brain are cumulative, and certainly that has to have some effect, but how do you give a certain percentage to this and that? It's hard to say. So I think from my perspective, I'm just kind of saying like, I'm going to monitor it. And as new information and new studies and new science comes out, I'm going to be open-minded to it. But the best things that I can do for myself is stay active, continue to try to use my brain as much as possible, try to remember people's names and remember things and focus on that type of stuff, make it important.
Yeah.
And then try to eat a good diet. Try not to get hit in the head anymore. Like those are the things that I can control, and so I want to focus on that, but also not worry about what I can't control.
Has that gotten any worse over the last couple of years, or has it been about the same?
It feels like it's been about the same.
Yeah.
But it's just something I'm going to have to pay attention to and kind of see where it goes, and hopefully that it doesn't get worse.
Yeah.
But if it does, then try to seek help in any way you can.
Yeah. So you're playing all sports. You're introduced to football a little later because you had to wait. When you first start playing football, how long did it take you before you knew, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do?
Yeah. So playing in 7th and 8th grade, we were on a really good team. We won the championship both years. We were undefeated. I had 2 of my buddies who are my best friends still to this day. They played at Wisconsin with me. So we had 3 Division I players on our 7th and 8th grade team. At that time, we didn't know it, of course. But
yeah, you better be good.
Yeah. So I knew I was pretty good because I played fullback and tight end, and you kind of play some of the other positions too. But when I would get the ball, nobody could tackle me. And then the parents on the other team were complaining that I was over the weight limit. Because in 7th grade, you had to be under 140 pounds to carry the ball. And I was 139 pounds at like 6'2". So you can imagine I was just a string bean.
Did you have to work to be at 139, or were you naturally 139?
I was just a skinny kid.
Okay.
So it was no problem. But I was under the weight limit, and so the commissioner actually came in the middle of the season and took me to a scale and weighed me to prove to all the parents in the conference that, yes, he looks really big and nobody can tackle him, but he is under the weight limit.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I was maybe better and stronger than kids in 7th and 8th grade, but I had no idea how that would translate. I think the first big recognition that I could be a good football player happened when I was a freshman, because when we went out for our freshman football team, they moved me up to varsity. And I was one of the first kids in my school's history to play varsity football as a freshman, and I started a couple games at outside linebacker. And so it was at that point I was like, okay, I'm probably better than my peers. I don't know how long this is going to last, but certainly being a freshman playing varsity felt pretty good for a 14-year-old.
At what point did you see Barry Alvarez at your game for the first time?
Yeah, so it was funny. So my junior year is when things started to heat up. That's when coaches started coming from all over the country. I mean, we had coaches from Miami and USC and Notre Dame and Wisconsin.
And by now, you're how big?
I was like 6'7", 245. So I was pretty tall. My freshman year is really when I stopped growing height-wise. I was 6'7", 220. And then I just kind of slowly added some weight throughout my high school days. And so by my junior year, I was getting a lot of scholarship offers. So I knew that, I was going to be able to play at the next level. And it was just a matter of kind of deciding where, which was exciting. Was
there ever anybody that really had a chance other than Barry in Wisconsin?
There was. And actually, at the beginning of the process, I was very open to going anywhere.
Yeah.
I kind of had the grass is greener mindset a little bit at the beginning because I was a kid who grew up in Wisconsin. I didn't really travel outside of the state much. We hadn't taken vacations and gone all over the place. We were kind of homebodies, I guess, a little bit. The big vacations we did, we'd go camping up in northern Wisconsin or up into Michigan or Minnesota. And so for me, it was kind of like college was going to be my chance to get away and see a different part of the country. But it was funny because then when I started to go visit a lot of these places, I visited Colorado, Nebraska, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame. All of a sudden I started getting that feeling of like, wow, now I know why I love the things that I see every day at Wisconsin so much. And when I visited the campus, I really fell in love with everything that Madison had to offer. The 2 lakes right there on campus, the awesome downtown area with the great social life and the great academic and the passionate sports fans, the great football program that develops offensive linemen, a lot of homegrown blue-collar walk-on guys that they develop into NFL players at all positions. But I think it was that finally learning a lot about what Wisconsin was, more than just, hey, it's a football team I like to cheer for, made me realize that this is the place for me.
Did you take other visits?
Yeah, so I visited a lot of other schools. I think I took all 5 of my visits: Notre Dame, Nebraska, Colorado, Virginia Tech, Wisconsin. I think I even took a visit to Kansas for track and field, because I'd been getting recruited for track and field also. So I was looking at, doing 2 sports. And yeah, it was, getting out made me realize how much I loved being home.
If you hadn't picked Wisconsin, where would have you gone
So
to school?
my final 2 were Notre Dame and Wisconsin.
Oh.
The academic at that point was really important to me. Not that it wasn't once I got to school, but once I realized that football was going to be my job, then the focus became football instead of academics. But at that point, when I was a senior in high school, I was looking at it as, hey, I can have somebody pay for my education by playing football. Let's do it, and then get the best education I can so that I can use that and go on into the working world. And so Notre Dame's got a very well-known connection within Notre Dame alumni. They've got a great business school, which is what I wanted to study. Obviously great academics and a great football program with a lot of history. And it was right down the road, so my parents and grandparents and family could come and watch me play. But I think when I looked at the totality of everything that Notre Dame offered to Wisconsin, like having a big school with a social life was important for my college experience, and Notre Dame just didn't offer that.
Yeah, Wisconsin has the edge there for sure.
Yes.
If there was ever a match made in connection heaven, I really think it's Joe Thomas and Wisconsin. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Do you think that, that would you be a different person today had you gone to Notre Dame, or had you gone to a
I think
different
so,
school?
and I think about that occasionally. I wonder if I hadn't gone to Wisconsin, would they have developed me into an offensive lineman that played in the NFL? Because a lot of those other programs, they don't have the coaching, they don't have the offensive system, and they don't have the development, the full development for high school kids to churn out offensive linemen that go to the NFL. Wisconsin is so good because they have excellent coaching. They run a pro-style offense. They work you really, really hard. They feed you really, really well. And I was a kid that needed to add weight. I was 250 when I came into college. And they have a weight room program that pushes you and puts muscle on you. And there's not a lot of programs across the country that do that, and you can see it in the results at Wisconsin, where every year they've got offensive linemen being drafted, and when you look back to their high school tape, they were 1 or 2 star recruits. They weren't the top guys, but the school develops them because of all those things that I mentioned. And so I wonder, if I didn't benefit from that development and that cocoon that they put around you and they build you in an offensive lineman, I wonder, would I have had the same amount of success?
Yeah, it's interesting. Was it Brookfield Central?
Yes.
You were a kicker too?
I did it all, yeah.
I got to know, what is Joe Thomas's extreme range on field goals?
Yes. So it was funny, like my high school is really well known for soccer. So we have a pretty big population at Brookfield Central. There was like 1,200 students. So it wasn't a small school, but the male population was heavily split among the sports. And so our football team, varsity-wise, only had like 25 kids. So it wasn't a huge team for being a bigger school. And so everybody except the quarterback played both sides of the ball. So I played tight end, tackle, defensive end, outside linebacker, but I was also the punter and I was the kicker because, well, nobody else could do it. Right. But I was actually a pretty good punter. I was a much better punter than I was kicker.
Yeah.
I could boot him about 45 yards would be like the max range on a field goal.
Right.
But it was a lot like my driver off the tee box. It could go anywhere. It's just as likely to go
300 yards, but out of bounds.
Yes, exactly. And I was a toe bomber. So I was pretty
Wait, you
decent.
straight on?
Straight on. Like
John
that.
Cockcroft style.
Boom, just like that.
Wow.
So I was better at kickoffs than field goals because kickoffs, you had a much bigger target than you did when you were trying to kick field goals.
Now, did you ever tell any of your coaches at Wisconsin that I can be the backup kicker if anything happens?
Yes. No, it was funny. They were never interested in my kicking after
I
they
can't
saw me
imagine
kick
why.
once. But I was the backup punter on a couple occasions.
Really?
Because I actually was a pretty decent punter. And there was actually a couple times in Cleveland when Chris Tabor was the special teams coach, because in the NFL you only carry one punter on the roster.
Yeah.
And sometimes the kicker is not a great punter, or the kicker gets like dinged up a little bit. And so the punter's already doing both roles. And then I was always the backup emergency punter.
Did you
And,
practice it at all?
I didn't really practice it, but to prove I could do it, because I always told Tabes, I said, hey, Tabes, if you need the punter, I'm your guy. He was like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, dude, I was All-State in high school. I'm your guy.
Were you an All-State punter?
I punted in the Shrine game, which is our
Wow.
All-Star game. I was like a 40-yard average guy, so I could
That's
kick
phenomenal.
it up there. Yeah. But the one thing that I had in my advantage was you couldn't snap it over my head. So I think that was why they wanted me back there, because I was like a goalie. You couldn't snap it over my head, and if it went low and I picked it up and they tried to tackle me, I was going to give them a stiff arm and still get the ball off. So that was my best attribute as a punter. But I went in the field house and on the field a couple of days after practice when Tabes was here, just to prove I could punt. And he was like, hey, you're actually not too bad. So I was the backup punter. That's my claim to fame.
Did you hope that
I did.
one time I want to get in there?
I totally did. I wanted, like a lot of people have that fantasy, like, oh, they're going to call your number. Nobody's going to know you could do it.
Right.
You go out there and you're going to boom like a 50-yarder over the punt returner's head. Unfortunately, it never happened. But I can imagine myself, if it actually happened, how nervous I would be when I got back there, that I would drop it or just totally shank it, and I probably would have. And then that would have been worse than if I never even had the opportunity.
Your body's completely different now. If you were to go out to a field right now, no practice, stretch a little bit, kick a ball, well, how far do you think you could punt it?
I think easily I could make a 40-yard punt.
Really?
Like 40-yard net, right?
So from the line, so
15 plus 40.
So you're
55.
talking 55 in the air.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Wow.
I was a pretty decent punter, and I think now that I'm not as heavy, I have a little more range of motion,
flexibility.
more flexibility. I think I could probably even punt it a little bit further.
That's pretty good.
My dad was a punter in high school, and so we used to take the ball out when we were kids, and we'd kick it back and forth. We'd punt it back and forth, and so that's kind of how I learned to be the punter, and I was always the punter on our teams growing up. And so I think part of it is like that nostalgia of me and my dad in the back punting the ball back to each other. I've kind of hung on to that a little bit.
So you decide that Wisconsin is the place for you. What was it like when you stepped on the field for the first day of practice under Barry Alvarez, and you're no longer this man among boys in high school, you're now playing against grown men? What was that like, and did you ever have any moments of, can I do this?
So when you start training camp at Wisconsin and you're just a freshman, they're mostly just putting you against freshmen when you're doing the one-on-one drills and stuff, because they want to see how you match up against their other recruits.
Right.
And we had a guy named Jamal Cooper. He was a highly ranked defensive end from the St. Louis area, and so him and I would go against each other. And like the first 2 or 3 practices, I locked him down pretty good in one-on-one pass rush. And after that, our offensive line coach was Jim Huber. He pulled me aside after the practice and said, hey, we think you have a chance to be pretty good. We're going to kind of start moving you up the depth chart to just kind of see if you can hang with some of these older boys, right?
Right.
And so they put me as the second string tackle, and I started taking some pass rushes against the juniors and then eventually the seniors. And I was holding my own. And it was at that point when I kind of realized, like, hey, I've only been here 4 days. I've had hardly any coaching, but I'm already locking down some of these guys that have been here 3-4 years that are way bigger than myself. Because I was only 265 at that point playing left tackle.
Wow.
And so they were still trying to gain weight on me. And I knew I wasn't ready to start right away because I was just so much smaller, and I didn't know the offense. I didn't know the technique or anything. But I knew, like, athletically and from like a physical standpoint, I could hang with those guys. So then I played that entire training camp as the second string tackle, and then the plan was during that season was if there was an injury at either tackle position, then I'd be the starter. But to get me some game experience, they wanted me to play jumbo tight end in short yardage.
Right.
And so I was the first freshman to play for Barry Alvarez, the first true freshman to play on the offensive line for Barry Alvarez, because there was a couple games that we were up significantly that they put me in there to get me some reps, and then I played in every game as the extra tight end. So it was really awesome getting that experience, and it felt cool kind of breaking the glass ceiling for true freshman offensive linemen to play with Barry, because he'd had so many great offensive linemen, but the tradition was always just to redshirt those guys. So I think at that point I realized, like, okay, I think I can do this. I belong, and I think I might be able to be a good college player.
Did you already in your mind know that Joe Thomas is going to play in the NFL one day? And if you didn't at that point, when did that seed get planted that this is definitely going to happen?
So that took a lot longer because I guess I've always had self-doubt. And I talked to a lot of players, especially offensive linemen that have had great careers. And it's funny, they say that they have that imposter syndrome just the same way I did. Like every day when I was in college, I thought I was going to wake up and I was just going to get my butt kicked. And people were going to be like, oh, see, we knew he was crappy. Even though everyone said he was going to be a good player, we knew he sucks. And so my junior year, I started seeing scouts come into practice. But scouts are always kind of coming to practice. But I noticed they were watching me a little bit more. And my offensive line coach, Jim Huber at the time, he would say, like, hey, the Packers are here. They were just watching you. And things like that, make you feel really good, especially for a kid growing up in Wisconsin who grew up a Packer fan. It's exciting. Like, at that point, I still didn't think I had what it takes to play in the NFL. But at the end of that season, you have an opportunity to petition the NFL draft board or something like that.
Yeah.
And they'll give you an idea of, hey, this is what your draft grade is.
Yeah.
So you can determine if you want to come out after your junior year. And when my coach said, hey, my offensive line coach said, hey, I think you should petition the board just to see where you're at. I was like, wait, what? Like to go out to the draft? And he's like, yeah. He's like, a lot of these scouts that are coming in are saying that you're going to be a first-round draft pick. And I was like, what?
And it's weird to hear that from your coach.
I know, from my coach. I'm like, you're the one that's supposed to not tell me this stuff and tell me to just stay in school.
But the transparency had to be awesome for you.
Yeah, and I appreciated that. And I think I ended up tearing my ACL in the bowl game that year. And so the decision was easier. But having the feeling that there was transparency and that my coaches were looking out for my own best interest, not just their best interest, really gave me comfort of coming back to play my senior season, knowing that these people aren't in it just for them. Like, they're in it for me just as much. Yeah. And so when I petitioned the draft board, they came back with a first-round grade, and they said that I'd be the second tackle or second offensive lineman taken, probably in the top 5. And I was like, whew, I guess I really might be able to do this thing for a living.
Man.
And so it was that point where it hit me. But really, honestly, even through my junior season, I was really just focused on being a student and being a football player and just trying to be the best left tackle. And like I said, it was that imposter syndrome where I thought I was good enough to play, but I didn't think I was anywhere near good enough to play in the NFL. And I knew growing up, my parents had beat it into my head, like, no kid plays pro sports. It's 1 in a million. You don't have a chance. So focus on your studies. Focus on your schoolwork.
Joe, you said that you had this imposter syndrome, as you call it. What role do you think that self-doubt played in ultimately making you the player that you became?
I think it plays a big role because every day you go in and you work as hard as you possibly can so that you're not uncovered as this imposter. And I think that drive, even to this day, it really is a big part of who I am, because I wake up feeling like I'm behind the pack and I need to catch up, right? And that was the feeling that I had when I was in the weight room, like, I'm just this skinny 220-pound kid from high school. I need to lift really hard and to gain that weight in order to be able to keep up with these monsters physically, right? And it was the same thing on the field. Like, man, people think I'm good, but I know I'm not really good, so I need to work extra hard to make sure I don't make any mistakes where they can point to that mistake and say, see, we told you, he does suck, right? And so it was like that perfectionist attitude, that like striving for perfection to, in my own mind, keep people away from seeing my own flaws. It's kind of a weird thing, and it made for a lot of stress during my career, but it drove me to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think as an offensive lineman, we're only as good as the number of mistakes we make. And so making the fewest amount of mistakes makes you the best player, not making the best plays making you the best player. And so for me, I think that was a huge part of my success as an offensive lineman.
Yeah. Where do you think that fear of failure comes from genetically? Is mom like that? Is dad like that? Are both like that?
Yeah, they're both like that a little bit. My mom, to this day, still works as a nurse, and I think she wakes up with that imposter syndrome. Like, I need to work. Like, Mom, I'm not going to tell her age, but you're old enough. You can retire now. And, gotta work. And that's kind of how my dad was too. at his job. And so I think I got a lot of that from them. But I think also, too, just kind of the culture of being an offensive lineman. That's the mentality. You know, we tease that we're the mushrooms on the team, right? The mushrooms. We're the guys that people throw in the dark corner. They throw poop on them, and they expect them to grow into something wonderful. And I think you kind of embrace that mentality as an offensive lineman. Like, you don't want the limelight. You don't want the attention. You just want to go about your business and work. And you're happy that nobody notices you, because usually when you do get that spotlight, it's not for a good thing. It's
for
a
holding.
penalty.
Sack.
It's a sack. It's a TFL, right? So I think a lot of it is a blend of all those things.
Yeah. When you were at Wisconsin, because you had this athletic ability, you were also playing on the other side of the ball. If you had focused and tailored your body to be J.J. Watt, what kind of career do you think you could have had as a defensive lineman?
I think I could have played in the NFL because I was a good enough athlete. I ran a 4.7, 240 coming out of high school. So I was fast, and I was pretty quick, and I was really strong for my size, very, very powerful in my hips, so I could knock people off the ball. I could shed people like defensive linemen need to do. And I had enough short area quickness where I could win pass rush moves. But I don't think I would have been very good. I would have been sort of like practice squad, maybe solid backup, because, and this goes back to when I was in college playing defensive line, I always beat my block, but I never had enough speed to accelerate and get the sack. I was the one step away guy. Like right as the quarterback's throwing the ball, I'm one step away from getting the sack, because I just didn't have that elite next level gear that great players in the NFL at the defensive line position have, where they beat their block and then they can accelerate and still get the sack.
Yeah. You had mentioned your ACL tear your junior year. You're playing Auburn. Capital One
Bowl, yep.
All right.
Orlando, Florida.
And you're playing on the defensive side, I think because of an injury. What happened on the play, and what was the immediate thought you had afterwards?
Yeah, so I was playing both sides of the ball in that game. We had some injuries on the defensive line. My freshman year, I was playing jumbo tight end, backup tackle, and then we had injuries going into the bowl game. So they actually flipped me during the bowl prep, and I started as the defensive end for the team my freshman year. So fast forward to my junior year, I'd played pretty well my freshman year, and so the coaches said, hey, we got some space in this bowl game. We got a little more practice time to prepare so we can get you ready for offense and defense. What do you think about going both ways? You know, we're not going to make you play the entire game on both sides of the ball because you'd just be worn out. But we'll give you maybe 20 plays on defense, see if you can make a couple big disruptive plays, TFL, sacks, or whatever, and, you know, help us win. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. It was Barry Alvarez's last game as a head coach, and I was all in for the team. And I thought it'd be fun, right? Be able to go out and be a high school kid again, run around and tackle somebody, right? I always make fun of the defensive linemen that they're dumb because they don't have to learn anything. All they have to do is learn who has the football, and they tackle them.
Yeah.
And so for me, I thought it was a great opportunity to go out and have some fun and help my team win. And so it was only like my third or fourth play on defense, and I was on the backside of the play. It was a toss sweep away from us. I was playing left defensive end. So I stood my tackle up. I saw that they tossed it, and they were running away from me. So I shed him, and I turned to pursue the ball to try to take an angle in case it was about a 8 or 10 yard run to get it on the tackle. Well, as I turned and I took my angle and I started running to try to get it on the tackle, our safety or corner came down and forced the ball back. So the ball started to cut back across the field. So now I'm running like this, and I'm taking an angle on a runner who's going like this, and now he starts to turn and cut pretty close to me, maybe just a couple yards away, like he's going to cross the field. And so what I did is, as I'm running full speed, I put my foot out into the ground, and I planted, and I was trying to turn to try to change my angle to get in on the tackle. And it's when I planted and I twisted that my knee just buckled, and then I took one more step and I just crumbled and fell to the ground. And I instantly knew that I had torn my ACL. At that point, I really didn't know a whole lot about it because I hadn't had a lot of injuries at that point in my career. And all I could think about was, 15, 20 years ago, is if you blow your knee out, like, your career could be over because the medicine just wasn't there. And so as I'm laying on the field, it didn't really hit me yet. I knew I tore my ACL. They helped me off the field. at that point I was still just focused on like, we're beating a team that we shouldn't right now.
Yeah.
It's Barry's last game. Let's get the win. So I just stayed on the sidelines. Like, they would never let a guy that just tore his ACL just stay on
Not
the
anymore.
sidelines.
Not anymore.
Now, but
Yeah.
I remember just sitting on that trainer's table.
So you were
I was
sitting.
just like laying on the training table with ice on my knee, just looking up and like trying to cheer the guys on the sideline. We ended up winning that game, and then they gave me crutches, and so I went in the locker room. And then when I got in the locker room, I met with the doctors, and that's when they said, "Hey, we think you tore your ACL." And it was at that point where it kind of like hit me. My parents came into the locker room, and I like started crying. The defensive line coach, who was honestly tougher than General Patton, like he was the biggest jerk, great defensive line coach, but he was the biggest hard ass of all time. He comes storming into the trainer's room where I'm sitting there, and he just starts crying. He's like,
Wow.
He's like, "I am so sorry. We never should have put you out there." And I'm like, whoa, you're not a guy that I ever expected to see cry, so this must be a big deal. So I'm crying. My parents are crying. I'm like, did I die? Like, I really had that feeling like maybe I'm dead.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't know at that point. And the staff had known already that the NFL draft report came back saying I was probably going to be a top 5
Did you know at
draft
that
choice. I think I did, because if I remember correctly, they told me before the game and then said, "Hey, we'll worry about it after the game," which is kind of my mentality. And so I kind of knew, I did know already where I would have been taken in the draft. But I don't think, even if I hadn't been hurt, that I would have come out early, because
That's what I was going to ask.
I loved Wisconsin. I loved going to school at Madison. I loved my friends, my teammates, my coaches. It was a dream, right? And the stress level was pretty low for a guy, especially going into my senior year. I kind of knew where I was going to get drafted, so I could just focus and enjoy the season, my senior season at Wisconsin, try to do some great things as a team. We had a pretty good team coming back. And so that's kind of where my mind was. But as soon as I heard I got injured, it took like 2 days before I snapped out of it. And then we set my surgery date. The doctors talked to me about how successful recoveries are these days and how they thought that I would still be back in time for the beginning of the season next year if I rehabbed fast. And then my mindset just became that single focus of, all right, just got to get ready for the next season, and I'm going to be bigger and better than ever. What can I do right now this offseason while I'm rehabbing to make myself better that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was hurt? And what was that? It was get in the weight room, get my upper body stronger, because I wasn't really strong. Couldn't use my legs because I was rehabbing that knee, but I could get my upper body stronger. So I started lifting like 4 days a week, bench press, me and the strength coach.
Yeah.
And so I gained some weight. And so I tried to use the negative and flip it into a positive.
I've talked to a lot of guys that have been in that exact position, knew their draft status, knew that they were looking at a fortune, millions, if not tens of millions of dollars on the table. And they've had a very similar injury, either that injury or one that is also potentially career-ending. And they almost always, in the first couple of sentences talking about it, talk about the money and the loss of money. You didn't even bring that up.
Yeah, because I had never put that money in my pocket at that point. Like, I had never associated being a first-round draft pick or a top 5 pick yet with the money I was going to make. It was just, oh, I get to continue my football career where all my other buddies at the end of their college careers, it's over. They're done. They're going to put a suit and tie on the rest of their life. And I was like, hey, I get to keep
And you never thought about the money.
Flip-flops, you know?
You never thought about that.
And I hadn't, I obviously knew that playing in the NFL is lucrative.
Sure.
But I had never yet placed that money in my pocket where if it got taken out, I would miss it, right? Because it was never mine.
Yeah.
And so it made it easier to handle the injury and deal with it because I wasn't worried about down the line and that money. I knew just focusing on being a great teammate and being the best left tackle that I could be, that stuff would take care of itself down the line.
That injury, even in 07, can come with a 12-month recovery. And this happened New Year's Day, and you're back in August?
Yep, training camp.
And at the time, I'm trying to think, that wasn't the case with most ACL injuries.
Most ACLs at that point were maybe like 7 to 9 months.
Yeah.
You know, I think they were at that point trying to find ways to accelerate the return to play timetable, but they weren't really successful because they saw that if they get you there faster people had a lot of lingering issues longer than
Right.
if they just were a bit more patient. And I don't know for sure right now, we'd have to ask the trainers, but I think the current thought is like, take your time, build your muscle back up, because then the reoccurrence of ACL tears is lower. Because that's the big thing, is when you tear your ACL, you lose like your muscle. And it takes a long time to get the balance and the muscle back to where it needs to be to get the stability in the joint to protect all those ligaments. And so if you rush that back, you're going to be playing potentially on a knee that's way less stable than the other knee.
And more likely to re-injure
More
it.
likely to re-injure it.
Yeah.
And so they take more patience now, I think. But at the time, it was about 6 months, and I was back full practice, full pads, tackling, and I didn't feel great about it.
Were you? It was in your mind.
It was in your
wasn't it?
head, but also your knee doesn't feel all that great. There's tons of soreness. There's tons of swelling still. You don't have the balance. It's a weird injury to come back from, because it's not like actually learning to walk again, but for 6 weeks I was on crutches and I couldn't use my leg at all. And then at that point, like you do kind of forget that normal cadence of walking, and you kind of have to reteach yourself to do those things normally without thinking about it, right? Because that's the big thing, is when you first start walking again and you first start jogging and then you start playing, all you can think about is that knee and every step you take, because it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah. And you hear about atrophy, but you really don't understand it's a real thing until you go through it. What was that like for you when you realized, you looked down at your leg, that's not my leg, played on it, this isn't my leg? At what point did you realize, okay, this is a real thing, these guys know what they're talking about, I have to make sure this leg is 110% of what it used to be?
Yeah, so after my surgery, it only took about a week, and they were changing like the dressing and stuff, and my right leg was like half the size of my left leg.
It
After
happens
only
quick.
a week.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how fast it happened, because I figured, you know, if I just laid in bed for a week, my legs wouldn't look like that. So I didn't understand why it happened so quickly, but it's something about the surgery and what
The
they
trauma.
do, and the trauma and the knee and the swelling, where those muscles just stop working. They stop functioning and your body just absorbs them. And so when you do try to get back to it, you don't have even 50% of the leg strength. And Lee Evans was a first-round draft pick from Wisconsin. He's a Bedford, Ohio kid.
Yep.
He had torn his ACL like 3 or 4 years before, and he was sort of in the same situation, where he tore his ACL in the spring game and tried to come back for that season, which would have been a really fast timetable. But he ended up being a first-round pick anyway. And so I talked to him a lot. He was really good as a resource to talk to about the rehab process, and that was the one thing he said. He said, get that quad back muscle-wise. That is the most important thing, because that is what helps with the joint stability. That's what's going to help get your speed back. That's what's going to help you feel normal. So do not slack on that rehab when they're making you do those quad exercises 1 million at a time every single day, because that is worth it. That's what you need to do.
Was there a point in your senior season where you came off the field after a game or a practice and said, okay, I'm back, it's 100%?
So we were playing at Michigan. It was our first Big Ten game of the season. And I was playing against Lamar Woodley, who ended up being, I think, a second-round pick for the Steelers, had a really good career in the NFL. And he was an All-American in college. And in college, you really only have 2 or 3 games a year, even at a major university, where you're playing against an All-American type talent, right? In the NFL, every year they're, every week,
Every
they're
game.
Pro Bowlers, right? But in college, you just don't see it that much. So I knew this was a big game for me, from a, hey, how did he play against the best of the best competition-wise going into the NFL draft? It was a big game for our team, playing against Michigan that year. They were a really good squad. And so I knew this was going to be a big measuring test for my knee, to see, hey, how good is this knee? How healed and how healthy is it? And so I ended up playing a really good game that week against Michigan, against Lamar Woodley. And during the game was the first time, and I think it was week 3, it was the first time since I had torn my ACL where I didn't think about it during the game. I just went out and played football. And at the end of that, I said, okay, I'm back. It's healthy.
So you lose one game that year, and you end up going back to the Capital One Bowl.
Yes.
And there's no way in the world Joe Thomas isn't thinking on that entire plane ride, this is the scene of the crime. And there is no coming back for another year at Wisconsin. This is my launching pad, my last launching pad to my goal, my dream, my love. What was that process like for you, getting ready to take that same field where you had torn your ACL 1 year earlier?
It was interesting, I think, because I thought about it a little bit, but at that point in the season, I had played a bunch of games on my knee, and it was feeling better every single week, and I was feeling stronger every single week. And so I didn't have a lot of apprehension going into that game, especially because I wasn't going to be playing defense. So I only had to focus on left tackle. We had a tough team, Arkansas, that we were playing. They had some really good defensive ends. And so my focus in my mind was play well against these guys. Everything takes care of itself. Don't have to worry about anything. And so once the game was over, I had that sigh of relief, like I'm healthy, I'm fine. I can now focus on the NFL draft.
Now, had you yet put that money into your pocket?
Not at that point.
You
no, not
still
that point.
hadn't let yourself think about
that. I was really adamant about, I want to focus on football during the football season. I'll hire an agent. I'll worry about NFL stuff after the bowl game. And so it wasn't until after the bowl game I interviewed agents, ended up picking an agent, and then that's when you're with your agent and he gives you what is somewhat realistic of an idea of, hey, this is where you're going to get drafted. This is what those contracts look like. You'll probably want to hire a financial advisor to help with all those contract things and learning how to handle money that you didn't have any of when you were in college. So it wasn't until after that bowl game where I started kind of down that NFL, this is my career as a professional path.
What's going through this humble kid from Wisconsin's mind when your agent is throwing 8-digit numbers at you?
Yeah, I'm like, man, I can buy a lot of fishing boats with that money.
That's what made Joe happy.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's all I ever wanted was a fishing boat, so I'm good.
Is that enough to buy one boat?
Yeah, right. Can I get that rowboat I always wanted? Maybe the 25 horsepower motor on the back.
I saw an interview once with you, and it made me laugh because anybody who comes from that kind of background kind of carries that with them through life. But you said that when you became a professional, your inclination was still to go to Walmart to buy furniture.
Oh, yeah.
You know, at what point did that change? Has it changed for you?
My wife has made it change a little bit. So I got married right before my rookie season, and
she's from Wisconsin as
she's
well,
from
right?
Wisconsin. Yep, she's from northern Wisconsin. She played basketball at Wisconsin with me, and that's where we met. She comes from a cheapskate family, just like I do, so she gets it. But we'd moved into a nice house in Westlake, Ohio, the west side of Cleveland, and I was ready to go to like Walmart and get the cheapest futon and everything I could get. And she's like, whoa, this is a real house. This is not like a college dorm anymore. We have to have like decent stuff or it's going to look ridiculous. So I kind of like understood that, but I still wanted to make sure that everything was kind of reasonably priced, which of course it's not when you buy furniture for a nice house. But the real like come to Jesus moment we had, I think my wife was okay with me like cutting corners on some of the furniture and stuff. But she wanted to get curtains because the house didn't have curtains in the master. And so we had somebody come over and measure and gave us a quote for like, 3 big curtain things, and it was like $1,000. And I flipped. That was like, I think our first fight. I flipped out. I was like, Annie, this is totally ridiculous. This is something we don't need at all. This is frivolous spending. And not only that, you went with the most expensive curtains in all of Cleveland. It's not happening. We're not doing any effing curtains.
Right.
That's it. This is ridiculous. Spending has gone too far.
You're putting your foot down.
Yeah, I had to put my foot down, and we got like a little fight about it. And of course, I ended up backtracking and letting her get her curtains.
Smart.
But still,
smart move.
Yeah,
Pick your battles, Joe.
I was going to say, because it wasn't worth that battle, because that was going to go on for a long time. But I still remember for a good 2 years, I'd walk in our bedroom and I'd look at those curtains and be like, oh, I hate you curtains. What a waste of money.
Well, we're going to do something that we've never done before, and that's split this into 2 parts. Joe's been so good and has so many great stories that we're actually going to have part 2 with Joe Thomas on Club 46, driven by Bridgestone. So we'll see you soon with more from the great Joe Thomas.